My name is Tom Harris. I'm 28 years old, and I live alone in a small apartment in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. It's not much, but it's home. Most nights, I come back from my job at a local bookstore, heat up a frozen dinner, and relax in front of the TV. Life isn't exactly exciting, but it's quiet, and I like it that way. At least I did, until one night turned my entire world upside down. It was a Wednesday evening, and I'd just sat down with a plate of spaghetti and a glass of water. I was flipping through channels when a loud, frantic knock at my door startled me. It wasn't a casual knock. This was heavy and urgent, like someone was trying to break the door down. Before I could even get up to see who it was, the door slammed open with a deafening crash. Police. Search warrant. Several officers stormed in, guns drawn and flashlights blinding me. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze, unsure of what was happening. The leader barked orders at the others as they spread out, ripping through my apartment like a tornado. What the hell is going on? I yelled, raising my hands instinctively. Stay where you are. One of them shouted back, pointing his weapon at me. I didn't dare move. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what could possibly justify this chaos. I've never been in trouble with the law. I don't even have so much as a parking ticket. Two officers shoved me onto the couch, while others began tearing through my belongings. They dumped out drawers, slashed open cushions, and flipped over my bed. One officer even ripped through my cereal boxes, scattering flakes all over the floor. What are you looking for? You've got the wrong place, I kept saying over and over. Drugs, the officer standing closest to me replied coldly. We have a warrant. Drugs, I repeated, stunned. I don't even smoke. You've got the wrong guy. Save it, he snapped. I watched helplessly as they destroyed my apartment, turning it into a scene out of a disaster movie. My heart sank deeper with each passing minute. Family photos were thrown on the ground, books were ripped apart, and my laptop was shoved off the desk, shattering the screen. After nearly an hour of this nightmare, one of the officers called out from the kitchen. Hey, I think we screwed up. The leader stormed over, snatching a paper out of his hand. I saw his face drop as he glanced between me and the document. Oh, for God's sake, he muttered under his breath. What? What is it? I asked, standing up for the first time since this ordeal started. He sighed and finally made eye contact with me. We were supposed to be at apartment 3B. I blinked, trying to process what he'd just said. This is 3A. I said through gritted teeth. I told you, you have the wrong place. The officers exchanged awkward looks, and without another word, they began to file out. No apology, no explanation. Just silence as they left my home in ruins. Wait, I called after them. What about my door? My stuff. You can't just leave. But they did. They left me standing there, surrounded by the wreckage of my life. I felt a mix of anger, shock, and humiliation. Over the next few hours, I began cleaning up what I could. As I picked up the shattered remains of a photo frame, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert about a drug bust in my building. Apparently, the police had raided apartment 3B and found nothing but some paraphernalia. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up researching what had happened and found out the warrant had been issued based on a tip from a confidential informant. The informant, it turned out, was a known drug dealer trying to cut a deal with the police. His information had been completely fabricated. And I was the collateral damage. Days passed, but the anger didn't fade. I filed a complaint with the police department, but the process was slow and filled with red tape. When I finally spoke to someone, they'd brushed it off, saying, mistakes happen. Mistakes. That mistake had destroyed my home, invaded my privacy, and left me shaken to my core. I couldn't eat or sleep without replaying the scene in my head. The shouting, the guns, the absolute disregard for my rights. What disturbed me the most was how easily it all happened. One bad tip, one careless mistake, and my life was turned upside down. I wasn't just angry, I was scared. If this could happen to me, an innocent man, what about the others who might not be so lucky? Even now, months later, I jump every time I hear a knock at my door. My landlord refused to replace the door, so I had to pay for it out of pocket. My apartment will never feel like home again. I wish I could say I got justice, but the truth is, I didn't. The officers faced no consequences, and I was left to pick up the pieces of their mistake. And that's what haunts me the most, that they walked away without a second thought, while I'm still living in fear. My name is Dan Carter. I'm 21 years old and a junior at the University of Chicago, majoring in economics. I'm a pretty average guy, decent grades, part-time job at a coffee shop, and a small group of close friends. Most nights, I walk home from campus to my off-campus apartment, cutting through a quiet residential area. It's usually peaceful, but one evening turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. It was around 8 p.m., and I was walking home after a late study session. The sun had set, and the streets were dimly lit by old streetlights. I had my earbuds in, listening to music, when I noticed headlights slowing behind me. I turned and saw a police car creeping along the curb. Before I could think much of it, the car stopped, and two officers jumped out. One of them barked, "Hey, you, stop right there." Confused, I froze. Is something wrong?" I asked, pulling out my earbuds. "Where were you an hour ago?" the other officer demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. "I was at the library," I said, my voice steady, but my heart racing. "Don't lie to us," the first officer snapped. "You fit the description of a suspect in a robbery nearby." My stomach dropped. "What? No, I didn't do anything," I stammered, but they weren't listening. Before I could even explain, one of them grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back. "You're coming with us," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Wait, I didn't do anything," I protested, panic setting in. "Check my ID, call the library, do something. I swear I'm innocent." The cuffs clicked around my wrists, cold and tight. People walking by on the street slowed to stare, their faces filled with curiosity and judgment. My face burned with humiliation as they shoved me into the back of the police car. The ride to the station felt endless. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what was happening. I've never been in trouble with the law. I don't even jaywalk. Yet here I was, treated like a criminal for something I knew nothing about. At the station, they placed me in a lineup with 4 other guys, all of whom looked much older and rougher than me. I was terrified, but more than that, I was angry. None of this made sense. After a few minutes, a woman stepped into the room. She must have been the robbery victim. She scanned each of us, her eyes narrowing as she went down the line. When she reached me, she frowned and shook her head. "That's not him," she said firmly. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by frustration. If I didn't match the description, why had I been dragged here in the first place? The officers pulled me out of the lineup, uncuffed me, and led me to a small room. One of them muttered, "You're free to go." "That's it," I snapped, rubbing my sore wrists. "You handcuff me, humiliate me, and drag me here for no reason, and now you're just letting me go." The officer avoided my eyes. "We had to act fast. We thought." "You thought wrong," I interrupted. "Did you even check the description? Or did you just pick me because I was walking alone?" The second officer finally admitted, "We needed to close the case fast. You were in the area, and look, mistakes happen." "Mistakes," I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. This wasn't a mistake. This was lazy and reckless. They didn't respond. They handed me back my belongings and showed me the door, as if I was supposed to walk away and forget the whole thing. I couldn't. The walk home that night was the longest of my life. Every car that passed made me flinch. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. I couldn't stop replaying the moment they handcuffed me. The looks from strangers, the cold, cramped seat of the police car. The next day, I learned the two officers had been suspended after the victim filed a complaint about their behavior. Apparently, they had ignored the suspect's actual description. A man in his 30s with a beard, because they were desperate to make an arrest. You'd think that would bring me some comfort, but it didn't. The damage was already done. I couldn't shake the feeling of being treated like a criminal, of being powerless in a system that didn't care about getting it right. Even now, months later, I avoid walking home alone at night. I feel a pit in my stomach every time I see a police car. I know not all officers are like those two, but the fear doesn't care about logic. What happened that night changed me. I'm not the same carefree guy I was before. Now, I'm always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if someone will decide I fit the description again. Ready to feel a chill run down your spine? Join us in the shadows and dive into the world of terrifying tales and creepy encounters. Subscribe now to Shivers in the Dark and hit the bell so you never miss a story that keeps you up at night. Story 3. My name is Kelly Davis. I'm 27 years old, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. My older brother Jake, who was 31, was my best friend. He worked late shifts at a factory across town, but no matter how tired he was, he always made time for me. Jake was the kind of guy who would do anything for the people he loved. That's why his disappearance, and what I later found out, haunts me to this day. It started on a Thursday night. Jake had texted me as usual, saying he was on his way home from work. He drove an old red pickup that was impossible to miss. Around 10 p.m., I got a call from a friend who'd seen his truck pulled over by the police a few blocks from our neighborhood. She said it looked like a routine stop, so I didn't think much of it. But Jake never came home. By midnight, I started to worry. I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, pacing the living room. Something felt wrong. Jake was never the type to just disappear without letting me know. The next morning, I called the police station. They confirmed Jake had been stopped the previous night, but they told me he'd been released shortly after. That didn't make sense. If he'd been released, where was he? I asked for more information, but the officer on the phone got defensive. He told me to stop asking questions and hung up. Desperate for answers, I went to the station in person. I demanded to know what had happened to Jake. One officer told me his car had been impounded but refused to explain why. Another officer claimed Jake had walked out of the station, and they had no idea where he went. Their stories didn't add up. For weeks, I searched for Jake on my own. I put up missing posters, called hospitals, and begged anyone who might have seen him to come forward. But nothing. It was like he vanished into thin air. Then, 3 weeks later, the call came. Jake's body had been found in a remote wooded area about 30 miles from town. The coroner's report said he had died the same night he was stopped by the police. Cause of death: blunt force trauma. I was devastated. My brother, my best friend, was gone. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. If he died that night, how did his body end up so far away? Why did the police claim he'd been released? None of it made sense. I started digging. I found witnesses who remembered seeing Jake that night. One man, who was too scared to come forward officially, said he'd seen several officers beating Jake near his truck. Another person claimed they'd heard yelling and saw Jake being dragged into a police car. When I confronted the department with what I'd learned, they denied everything. They said there was no record of Jake being harmed while in their custody. They stuck to their story that he'd been released, but I didn't believe them. Too many things didn't add up. Jake's car was impounded, yet they never explained why. Witnesses saw him being beaten, yet there was no report of any struggle. And the biggest question of all, how did he end up dead in the woods, miles from where he was stopped? I filed a formal complaint, but it went nowhere. the department closed ranks, protecting their own. The officers involved were placed on leave for a while, but no charges were ever filed. It felt like the whole system was designed to bury the truth. Even now, years later, I'm convinced Jake's death was covered up. Someone in that department knows what happened to him, but they'll never admit it. And I'll never stop wondering about his final moments, how scared he must have been, how he must have fought back, and how no one was there to help him. Jake didn't deserve this. He was a good man, and he should still be here. But instead, I'm left with an emptiness that will never go away, and a distrust of the people who are supposed to protect us.